Well, we are continuing to get closer and closer to the end of 2024. What does the weather outlook look like as we near Christmas and New Year's and looking ahead into the early part of next year, 2025? Let's get a rundown on things. Joining us now for a conversation, Eric Snodgrass with Conduit is with us here today. Eric, good to catch up with you again. Man, oh man, hard to believe we're already nearing the end of the year. For some folks, I know they got a little ice over the weekend. We've seen some cold temps, but then, a little warm up. Not completely December weather, I'd say, right now for some folks, Eric.
Well, it's kind of crazy that you bring that up. We were chatting just before we started here. Last Thursday I was in Grand Forks. It was minus 14 in the morning, and here I'm at home, in East Central Illinois, and we're in the 50s. So like that's a 65-degree swing in temperatures. And yeah, over the weekend we saw that system go through parts of Iowa that brought in some snow north, but ice in between. And as it went through, we quickly followed it with more mild air. So it was a problem, but I think what I'm more thankful for out of it is there's some moisture in it. And we've gotten some of that moisture into our ground, which is needed because of how kind of extensive the lack of good subsurface soil moisture is throughout a lot of prime acres in this section of the country. By the way, this pattern's being fueled by just a tremendous amount of flow coming off of Japan. And it's just zonal, straight west to east across the open Pacific. And this morning I was tracking a flight whose ground speed was Mach 1. But it wasn't breaking the sound barrier because it's moving with about a 200-mile-an-hour tailwind right now. And there's a lot of flights that are just taking advantage of that. But that tells you where this pattern is, right? If you have such a strong zonal jet, what does it do? It's pushing the jet stream farther and farther across the Pacific toward the West Coast, which is where all the moisture for the next 10 days is going to target. We do have some wetter conditions from eastern Texas to the Ohio River Valley, but the plains are just going to continue to stay drier. And we have one more shot at colder air, I think, before the end of the year. But the end of this year is going to finish on a very mild note. And so it just kind of has us questioning when and where is cold air going to return? What's it going to do in terms of snow? Is it going to be a white Christmas for somebody that usually doesn't get it? And all of those things are kind of front of mind right now. But the biggest thing, Jesse, is just where this lands us when we finish winter and what our spring drought situation looks like.
And that's something we talked about quite a bit last week as well,
Yeah.
and just some of the early concerns about what drought could look like in spring 2025 in the US. Again, we got a long ways to go, but if we have a mild end of the year, and who knows what January, February brings us, eh, there's there's some concern out there as we talked about last week, Eric.
Yeah, and I just want to say this. We need to make sure that we're clear on the tone. It's a concern. I'm not trying to raise hype on this. So what I'm saying is that I'm watching the ocean temperatures across the equator where there's a La Nina. I'm watching the ocean temperatures off the Baja, watching the ocean temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska. If those three areas get cold and stay cold, risk of Midwest drought goes up. We know that following dry falls, okay, 6 and 10 years that follow dry falls have dry springs and summers. So we see that happening, and we just had a question like, is 2025 the year for that? Now, the failure point is that if the ocean temperatures warm up across the West Coast, no. We're not talking about drought next year. We're talking about plenty of rain like we saw this year. The Bermuda High will be at home and things will look pretty darn good. So it's just to make the point that when we say we're concerned about drought next year, I want to give you a number to think about. The number 6 and 10. So when we see this combination of events, 6 times out of the last 10 times that it happened, we had drought concerns. Let me give you another point here. If you showed me what was going on winter 2008 into winter 2009, I would have told you that 2029's growing season had a 6 in 10 chance of drought concern. And if you remember the 2029 growing season, La Nina faded, El Nino built in, warm waters up the West Coast, Bermuda High came over to Bermuda, and it was one of the best growing seasons in the Midwest they've ever had. So I just want to be clear that while we say there's drought concerns because of the lack of soil moisture in the Central Plains, because the Central Plains have been so dry as of late, because the Mississippi River last week at the end of the week was almost 7 feet below low stage, those are all the things that are checking the boxes on the drier side of average. So this winter needs to punch way above its weight class in order to get us out of those concerns. And I told the folks in the Northern Plains last week, I said, you know what I want for you? You really want me to ruin your lives? I want a massive April 4th blizzard. Because an April 4th blizzard brings you the kind of snow that you get to keep. It drains into the soil. And I said, we need to finish this winter hard. I mean, just I need you to hate it so that you love it come May, because I don't want to be talking about major drought concerns going into 2025. But there's a few things on the table right now that have me doing that.
I want to make sure too. You mentioned 2009. You said 2029. I'm sure. Point of
Oh, did I?
clarification
Oh,
there.
2009. Sorry. We're not going out that far. Yeah. So it was just weird because those ocean temperatures in January 1, 2009 were, I mean, they were classic worry
Mhm,
signals for guys like me to tell you to worry about drought. But between then and June, the whole thing flipped and just the waters warmed up. The ridges built west. I'm talking like the west coast. We had northwest flow, big storms, no heat,
mhm.
and 2009 big time yields because of it. So it's just to point to, so many of us are just going to tell you, hey, we're worried, we're worried, but you need to know the other side of the narrative. And 2009 is a classic example where all of the pieces lined up, but fell apart by the time we got into May and June. So that's it.
Yeah, just making sure we weren't time
Yeah.
traveling ahead or
Oh,
anything here
I
today.
can know the forecast in 2029, Jesse. Boy, you and I be a couple of very wealthy men, but
I knew
reality,
what you meant. I just figured
yeah,
I better clarify. Okay, present day, right
yeah.
now. How about South America? Anything changing down there, Brazil, Argentina wise that you're watching?
You're going to hear some narrative about it's getting a bit drier across the northern growing areas. And I just looked this up this morning. In the last 2 months, across the whole of the northern growing areas, including Mato Grosso, Goiás, Tocantins, Bahia, you know, um, they're off by 3.5 inches, but they've still had an average of 11 inches. So you just have to understand it's still raining, even though it's drier than average. And it takes a pretty significant hit on that area. They need to be like 50% or less of normal to be major concern. And the models are trying to fill it all back in. And where it's expected to go a bit drier in Argentina and into southern Brazil, I don't see significant heat stress. And I also don't see the problem because it was wet there recently. So I'll say the same dumb sentence again. If we're looking for a bullish story out of Brazil, it's just not there right now. It may come
Mm,
later, but it's just not there. But I'm going to actually hold another special webinar in early January where all we talk about is Brazil, so I can bring everybody kind of up to speed on what to watch, so you become a little bit better consumer of that. We'll advertise that on agweather.com, ag-wx.com, completely free, but just a great way to kind of stay connected with folks.
absolutely. Eric, anything final you'd share with us this week before we close it out?
There's always something crazy to be watching. And I'll be honest, I found myself reminiscing a bit about the 2013-14 winter. This was one where the polar vortex in January did this wacky split and got squeezed and just dropped brutally cold air into the midsection of the country. And there's part of me, and just I want to be clear on this, it's just a small part of me that thinks that might happen in January. There are some indications that the polar vortex is starting to wobble a bit. It's strong today, but if we get a massive push, like in either Scandinavia or Alaska, just squeezing that sucker deep in the stratosphere, it could be timed with a pretty significant cold air outbreak across the eastern half of North America. And it'll be interesting to see what that does to natural gas prices. It'll be interesting to see what that does, because sometimes there's some very early calving that happens at that point. And for a lot of us, that'll probably be the memory point of the winter of 2024-25, when we just drop in some brutally cold air. So I'm keeping an eye on it, but I'm skeptical at best.
Agweather.com for more, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass with Conduit. Always appreciate it, my friend. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we'll talk next week.